second presentation today is from Rory JonesWhite, The Fall and Rise of the Apex Predator and the Elimination and Conservation of Wolves in the West. So we'll take a moment as we switch out, it happens. All the good things today. So it's my pleasure to introduce Rory JonesWhite. She's an undergraduate student pursuing a double major in Asian Studies and Environmental Science with a minor in History, and expects to graduate in 2026. Her research includes environmental policy, conservation, and human-wildlife interactions, with a particular focus on the predator reintroduction and ecosystem restoration. This research was conducted under the guidance of her advisor, Dr. Derek Buckley. Welcome, Rory.
Okay, give me a second to figure out how this works. Okay, perfect. So, I'm taking first. This is my presentation about wolf reintroduction. So, I wanted to give you a nice picture of a wolf before we started off. So, starting with wolves in the American West, wolves are key ecological members. They are apex predators and part of predator-prey relationships. So these relationships are extremely important to help maintain grazing animals populations. So elk, deer, moose, bison, and caribou are their natural food. And so since these animals tend to graze on grasses or trees, it is extremely important for them to be maintained in order for ecosystems to remain within their carrying capacity. Overgrazing is extremely harmful. There were thought to be around 2 million wolves within North America before European settlers arrived. It is widely believed that wolves actually originated within North America, then migrating to Eurasia and undergoing evolution before they returned back anywhere between 11,000 to 30,000 years ago through the Bering Land Bridge, which connected Serbia to Alaska. So here is a Russian proverb, wolves are fed by their feet. So wolves move a lot. They are thought, or not thought, but they are known to run anywhere between 10 and 45 miles per day. This is in order to hunt prey. So they are genetically slower than most of their prey, and thus they have to test their prey in order to find weak, sickly, or injured herd animals in order to eat. So this requires a lot of running and movement in order to find their prey. So I wanted to talk a little bit about wolves' relationships with two major groups. So first, wolves and Native Americans. So before European settlers arrived, wolves lived amongst Native Americans for thousands of years. Native Americans held a lot of respect, admiration, and reverence for wolves. So their interactions tended to be much more positive than with Europeans. So wolves were seen as teachers. The Lakota tribe believed that they were spiritual representations of loyalty, cooperation, and loyalty and cooperation. While the Arapaho tribe actually believed that wolves were teachers and that they taught man how to hunt and how to live good lives. Something I found very interesting was that wolves were actually involved in the Ojibwe oral history and their creation story. So their creation story goes that there was first man and his brother who was a wolf, and that they walked amongst the earth and named every species before the creator then told them they could no longer be brothers, but that they should care for each other. And this impacted how Ojibways treated wolves. Most native tribes avoided hunting wolves. There are stories in especially the Great Lakes region where wolf hunting would occur, mostly for population maintenance. But for the most part, there was very little hunting, as it was seen as very taboo to kill such a spiritual creature. Moving on to wolves and European settlers, we see a very drastic shift in how humans thought of wolves. So Europeans brought with them a lot of animosity towards wolves from Europe, first off, there was a lot of agricultural and economic concerns that happened. When Europeans came, they started colonies and had livestock, and since livestock was not, there was no electric fences at this time, there was no way to prevent wolves from going into these cages and killing cattle, which would be very devastating for especially early settlers who used this as food sources for their entire colony. This became extremely frustrating and harbored a lot of animosity towards wolves, which would later lead to their persecution by humans. There was also, what I found very interesting, was a lot of religious beliefs that would get tied to wolves. So there's two main facets of this. First, within Genesis, first off, Christianity was the majorly believed religion amongst settlers. And within Genesis, which is in the Bible, God tells Adam and Eve that humans have dominion over the land, which gave humans a belief that they could control the land how they see fit. This means that they could use the land for whatever resources, and didn't necessarily mean that they needed to care for the land and let it be. The other side of this was that wolves were actually seen as devilish. Their needs were seen as sinful and ravenous and against Christian beliefs, as well as Jesus being seen as a shepherd and wolves being seen as, the attackers of the flock of Jesus. So early settlers believed that wolves could kill your soul if you were killed by a wolf, even though there were almost no documentations of wolves attacking humans. The only few documentations were wolves that had rabies. They still believed this. And this transpired to a lot of folklore and fairy tales involving this fear for wolves. So you can think of Little Red Riding Hood, the Three Little Pigs, even The Boy Who Cried Wolf, with this idea of the big bad wolf, this wolf that is deceitful and greedy and aggressive and cruel. And as Europeans started to expand westward, they started to become in more and more conflict with wolves as they entered into new habitats and destroyed habitats that wolves already lived in, removing their prey, which would be cattle, to be what wolves would go after. So the extermination of wolves is what followed. In the early 1600s and 1700s, this was state and locally done. So there were bounty systems. That is what this picture is right here. So people would be paid per wolf carcass that they would give to state or local authorities. It could be anywhere between $1,000 to $2,000, matched to current day currency. And wolves were killed like this. There were also stories of farmers being reimbursed for equipment that they bought in order to kill wolves that were attacking their land. These killing methods were often extremely brutal. It wasn't, unfortunately, just shooting, but they would poison carcasses in order to kill them. So they would find cattle or bison carcasses and poison them with cyanide to kill the wolves, which also ravaged the ecosystems as other scavenging animals would eat these poisonous carcasses. And there were very unfortunate stories of wolves being set on fire while they were still alive. Because of how much animosity and hatred humans had for wolves, they were seen as so evil that this was an okay form of punishment. In the 1800s, the Bureau of Biological Survey ordered the eradication of wolves within the lower 48 of the United States. This meant that all wolves that were found would be killed. This did not just mean wolves within free land, but also in protected areas in the national park, wolves were killed. So park rangers were often extremely involved in the killing of wolves within the United States. So this picture here is one of the park rangers at Yellowstone National Park. They destroyed the den, and he is playing with these wolf pups before they were to be killed. So this was done for a multitude of reasons. First, hatred that ranchers and farmers had was a major push, but wolves were also seen as injurious to game animals in protected land. So in Yellowstone, they were so dangerous to elk and bison that they had to be killed off. And the last two, or going back a little bit, between 1914 and 1926, there were about 136 wolves that were killed by Yellowstone Park Rangers in Yellowstone boundaries. And the last two wolf pups that were known to be domestic to the United States were killed in Yellowstone in 1926. They lured them out with a bison carcass and then shot and killed them. So there ended up being a political movement forward to reintroduce wolves, and this was a very slow process. So it started with a push of environmentalism and scientific advocacy. After World War II, there was more science done on more scientific research on ecology that happened, and they were finding that areas without predators were degrading, and more predation ecology was happening about the relationships between predators and prey that was pointing towards the need for predators to be involved in ecosystems rather than being harmful and dangerous to the health of the ecosystem. The Endangered Species Act was also signed and passed by Richard Nixon in 1973, and gray wolves were later entered in 1978 as endangered, and everywhere except for Minnesota, which had a few packs of wolves that were in the Great Lakes area. This was because we were seeing a very rapid decrease in, a very rapid increase in extinction in species, and they decided that this needed to be curbed, and so the Endangered Species Act was passed. Just because there was talk of reintroducing wolves did not mean it was that conflict. It was very slow. Lots of people didn't agree with it. A lot of scientists didn't even believe that adding a predator would inherently benefit an ecosystem, and that it might just be the nature of ecosystems that they will have periods of degradation and periods of flourishment. So in 1991, there was a environmental impact statement that took 3 years. There were 22 public hearings, there were town halls, there were over 180,000 public statements that were taken, and there was scientific research done in order to get to a place that they felt comfortable to reintroduce wolves. So this involved talking to public members, and they had to research where would be a suitable place, and they had to research if there were even wolves, because there were questions if there were actually wolves just hiding away from civilization. This was not the case. There were no wolves, and they decided that Yellowstone would be the best site for wolf restoration. In January 1995, there were 14 wolves that were captured in Alberta, Canada, and brought to Yellowstone, where they were put into acclimation pens and eventually released. This was thought to have needed to be a 3 to 4 year process, but they actually were able to stop after 2 releases of wolves. In 1996, they released 17 additional wolves, and after that point, wolves were found to be able to survive on their own without needing to continuously bring wolves in from Canada, and they acclimated within the space very quickly, which was very good to hear. This is the map, this is the 2019 map of the different wolf pack ranges, which I just thought was very interesting to see how they move within Yellowstone. There was an initial boom in wolf population, which peaked in 2003. This was likely because elk population was so large because there was no predators, that there were just way too many elk, and they were not healthy. They were living extremely long lives. They were reproducing and passing down less valuable traits because there was no predator to come and eat them. They were also leaving Yellowstone and going into farmlands and local areas and eating all of the food there. And so with the introduction of wolves, we see that curbed, which I'll talk about in my next slide. Sorry, I'm getting excited. But Yellowstone wolf population actually has fluctuated in the recent years at around 100 wolves with 10 packs. So we've actually seen that it has started to plateau. And of course, it is not the same, but like every year there's a different amount of wolves, but it seems to fluctuate within the same range. And this is, some scientists believe this is because that, humans think about nature being inherently chaotic, but some scientists believe that actually nature finds a way to curb itself and balance itself out when left to, flourish by itself, and that human interaction with it is what makes it seem so chaotic. This is not to say that there's always 100 wolves in Yellowstone, but it's not dropping to drastic numbers. So, trophic cascade. I think this is so interesting. Trophic cascade is it's a term that specifies the effect that predators have on ecosystems. So this picture here is the same area in Yellowstone in 1997, which is a year after the last wolves were introduced, 2001 and 2010. And you can see such a drastic difference in health in the environment. This is because there was an explosion of elk population once wolves were exterminated from Yellowstone. This affected not just trees and grasses that were being overly grazed on, and this is one because of the sheer number of elk that were there, but also because of their lack of necessity to move in large areas. They could stay in an area until they destroyed almost all of the vegetation, and then they would need to move. There was not any predators to come after them, but elk population didn't just affect willows, aspens, cottonwoods, and other vegetation, but also other wildlife. So there was no beavers left in Yellowstone for a period of time because there were very little trees that they could use to make dens. There were very few berries, and so bears started to leave Yellowstone in order to find other food. Coyotes took the place of wolves as predators, and because of that, there was a very sharp decrease in longhorn antelope because their babies are smaller than elk babies, and coyotes would prey on antelope mothers that had just given birth and their babies, and so that lifespan for longhorn antelope during this period was about 7 days, I believe, for the babies. But once wolves were reintroduced, there was balance that was restored to Yellowstone. So coyote populations went down, elk and bison populations started to decrease rapidly, and over years and years we see so much growth in vegetation. Beavers have started to return back. There was an increase in hawks and eagles and other scavenging birds that would follow the wolves and eat, and just bettering the ecosystem. So my thesis was just about why it wasn't important to reintroduce the wolves, and Trophic Cascade is kind of my shining badge of why wolves should be in ecosystems and why predators are important within all ecosystems in order to preserve natural life. Of course, when you see documentaries and you see the cute little elk get killed, it's very sad, but in the grand scheme of things, it is so much better for the ecosystem when we have these relationships that are allowed to naturally play out. So that is my presentation. Thank you so much.